Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It's our pleasure to have Dr. Ivy Hu to be here with us today. So, Dr. Hu, sorry, I feel like I'm calling myself. Yeah, so Dr. Hu is now a professor in the Department of Urban and Regional Planning at UF. She's also the new department chair. Her research area is the interdependence of transportation and land use, with a special focus on empathy. So, for example, the topic today of her talk today is on how the impact of integration of integration of transit service and transportation network company service on job accessibility, or how easy one can get to job opportunities, specifically on low-income workers. Before I turn the floor to her, I want to say that today she is supposed to be in in her department all day, because the ACSP, which is like AAG, right? Association of Collegiate Schools of Planning Executive Committee is visiting her department. So she managed to make the time and come here. So let's hope not to keep her so long.
I'll come back a bit.
Maybe she'll appreciate it over here.
So,
Thank you so much. I want to briefly talk about my background a little bit, so that we can have some connections. I was trained all the way from college in urban planning. So urban planning forever. However, the urban planning program that I went to in China, it was originated from economic geography department. So from initial education, I have strong connection with geography. And then after I got the degrees and I started working at University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. So that was my job before this one. And I also had a lot of collaboration with the geography department over there. And I'm going to AAG. So just to demonstrate that, hopefully we can have the dialogue. But I am a transportation planner. My whole field is about transportation. And when we're talking about roads, vehicles, and all those new technology, that could be something that I took it for granted, but you don't know exactly what I'm talking about. So feel free to ask me, to stop me in the middle. And this is a big room with different tables. Can I ask how many of you who are master's students? Okay, PhD students. And the rest is faculty on the separate table. Okay, so I have to make the presentation understandable by students, but also demonstrate research rigor. Okay, I'll try to do that. So my topic is here, and I of course I recognize TNC could be a term that's foreign, at least not familiar. That's transportation network companies, Uber, Lyft, etc. So this is just to talking about how to connect transit, the buses you see. Well, here in Gainesville, we don't have real transit. We don't have subways, we don't have light rails, but transit in other places include all those mass transit. And how we can connect regular mass transit system with the on-demand, pay-as-you-go, like a TNC, Uber, Lyft services. And my focus is, of course, always have a equity implication there. Yeah. I have to. Yeah. Okay, this is a continuing trend. Transit does not really deliver to your destination. So those of you who still use transit, right, it doesn't get to your doorstep. And then TNC, Uber, Lyft can get you door to door. So there is a growing trend in the transportation field and in research saying we have to integrate them. One is public transit, one is privately provided on-demand services. And we have to integrate them so that we can get to our destinations in an affordable and efficient way. There are a lot of examples. The photo I use, and you don't see a credit there because this is our photo. This is one of the NSF projects that I had in Milwaukee. And from the photo, you can tell this is to provide a service. This is the van, like Uber Lyft, just a little bit larger. Provide that service so that we can connect all those workers who use transit, who use big buses to get into a transit hub, to get into a major stop, then use this on-demand service to get to their healthcare, their jobs, their childcare, etc. So this is one of the examples in Milwaukee, a connection between the on-demand small vehicle services with the fixed route mass transit services. And I didn't put another photo here, so it's the NSF Civic grant. The other example is a project done in Atlanta. So it was led by a professor in Georgia Tech. And he developed a programming to route the vehicles around MARTA stations. You know, MARTA is the real transit system in Atlanta. So he's doing kind of similar project in a different location with slightly different transit and slightly different vehicles there. But both of them are example to connect mass transit with the on-demand transportation network company services. So it's growing and people are implementing it, but we don't understand their equity implications yet. For sure, our projects were to understand them, and we want to see who's using them. Does the service deliver people to their destination in an affordable and efficient way? Okay, then that was only examples. Then coming back, this paper was written, I started to write it 2 years ago, so it was not really about FlexRide Milwaukee, but about a different case study. 2 years ago, we say that we have to be able to analyze it because it's a growing trend. So we want to know exactly what it means. Does it reach the equity goals that we wanted to reach? So we say we have an analytical framework. It's only for analysis. It's not really, because it's not realistic. I'll explain why it's not realistic very soon. And so the framework can help us to estimate accessibility improvements. Accessibility, how easy we can reach the opportunities. Higher accessibility is more desirable for us. To improve accessibility, we can travel faster, or we can have the destination closer to us. So that's accessibility. We want to develop the framework to see if the transit TNC integration, whether that can improve accessibility. If it can improve accessibility, what's the equity implication? What does that mean? Here is what I mean, that its scenario analysis is only for the analytical framework. It's not very realistic. Here, TNC, so Uber Lyft, serves as the last mile connection of the transit. So you take the bus to a transportation hub, then you take TNC Uber Lyft to get to the last leg of your trip. And if it's on the rail transit, for example, MARTA in Atlanta, you know the rail system only deliver you to that location, right? You have to walk probably a mile, like half miles to get to your final location. So last mile connection provided by Uber Lyft. So that's the connection there, and here is the scenario analysis. We have 9 scenarios, and we assumed 3 transit fare scenario, the TNC transit fare, I'm sorry, TNC fare. We assume a situation which is unrealistic. We assume the situation that transportation agencies or public sector have some subsidies for the last mile TNC operation. So for example, this is operated in a lot of places. If I have a transit card, right, then I took Uber Lyft, I'll get a reduced fare. That's subsidies in a way. And for the example I showed in the previous slide for the experiment in Milwaukee, and we had very low fare. for using this Uber Lyft type of transportation service. It's only $1.50. In some cases, it's $0 to use that. So it's huge subsidy and it's being implemented somewhere. But is it sustainable? We don't know. But anyway, so that's the reason I'm saying like the fare, we assume subsidies, but it's only an assumption based on research purpose because it cannot be fully implemented in the real world. The subsidies are not realistic yet. And we also have transfer penalties. This is a transportation term. When we transfer, we have to wait there. There is some emotional stress, so there is some transfer penalty waiting at the bus stop for my ride, Uber Lyft, right? And we put some time here as indicator of transfer penalties. So 9 scenarios altogether. Then we say like, okay, just run this scenario analysis, look at accessibility improvement and see how accessibility are distributed among different population groups. Then we can come back and decide, or at least assess whether the transportation policies, for example, subsidizing TNC, whether those policies can really address the transportation problems here, can improve the efficiency or equity of our services to disadvantaged groups. So research questions. To what extent does transit TNC integration, so using Uber Lyft as the last mile solution for the transit services, to what extent that integration improve accessibility to low-income jobs? We focus on low-income jobs for low-income workers because those are the workers who rely on transit. Those are the workers who rely on transportation services to deliver to their last mile connection, their jobs, their healthcare, their childcare, etc. Higher income people, they have cars. They just call Uber Lyft, right? They are not reliant on transit and that connection. So we focus on low-income jobs and for low-income workers. Then, of course, with some public subsidies here, for sure, even without doing the analysis, you can imagine we will see accessibility improvement. Subsidizing money to get to some destination easier, by default, by definition, improve accessibility. But our step is to compare whether the accessibility benefits is distributed equitably among different population groups, even within low-income workers, because they live in different places, they have different needs of transportation. So we want to see accessibility benefits, whether they are equally distributed among the population groups within low income. So there is the intersection implications there. Okay, and I'll have the step and kind of graphs showing how we do analysis. These are abstract, but it's so easy for geography people to understand. We have a transportation network, and we have the jobs here, right? And we just lay them over. Then you can imagine accessibility is high in this like middle right cell or census tract or city, whatever you call it. It has good transportation network, transit network, and it has the concentration of jobs. So for sure, naturally. Then the 3 cells surrounding it has medium accessibility. So this is based on the transit network. Then we have the transit TNC, transit Uber Lyft connection, because we want to provide the last mile connection. So for me living here, I take transit, then use the TNC using Uber Lyft for my last mile connection. So I suddenly reach a little bit further. I suddenly reach more cells. I suddenly have access to opportunities in different cells. So that's the transit TNC connection. And with that connection, I reach to more census tracts, cells, census tracts, geography. And I reach more opportunities and I improve my accessibility. By definition, it's very easy to assume. Then we calculate the improvement. So A minus B, right? But the accessibility improvements are gonna be different for different groups of people because they live in very different geography areas. So for population group 1, if they live in the upper part of the city, then you lay over with the maps showing accessibility improvement, you can easily say that they have significant improvement because where they live, they experience accessibility improvement. And then for another population group, if they live in different areas, for sure, their experience of accessibility improvement is going to be very different. Okay, so that's kind of the framework. Then we get down to talk about data and the methodology. Chicago. This is the map of the city of Chicago, and we use census tracts, and you can see the gray boundaries of census tracts, 801 census tracts, and this is the transit network. So there are real transit, there are bus system. And the reason we use Chicago, because Chicago is still the only city that provide TNC data, all this transportation network company data, the specific trip data for the whole city boundary. We can argue that is the city enough because we know people travel to jobs outside of the city, but we don't have data. And still Chicago has the best TNC data, and that's the reason it's our case study area. Okay, and other data. So again, Chicago is the only city that have transportation network, their trip, starting any time, distance of the trip, and the fare aggregated to $2.50 increments. This is CMAP, Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning. That's their regional planning agencies. They provide transit. So all those real transit, bus transit, their travel time distance, automobile travel time distance. And 2017, I forgot Lotus, but it's longitudinal. Low-income jobs and workers by race, ethnicity, and gender. And you can tell, like we started the research a while back, and we had to stay there because we need to have the pre-pandemic data. All the data are messed up during the pandemic. So this is the distribution of low-income jobs by the Lotus data. And concentration of low-income jobs in the center of Chicago, and a little bit around the airport, and stretching along some corridors. So this is the distribution of jobs. Jobs are still concentrated in the city. So you probably remember the concentric zones, and this still a little bit still follow that concentric zones. Jobs are in the middle. And the equation to calculate transit-based accessibility. This is the equation. All you need to know is that it considers jobs and discount jobs based on travel time. This is the typical gravity-based model. The further away, the further we discount the opportunities. The further away, like 10 jobs will discount it as 5 or 2, depending on the time. So you saw the Chicago transit system map. You saw the number of jobs distribution in the Chicago. Then we just, based on that equation, we calculate job accessibility. That's transit. Now, in the next step, we have to figure out how to calculate. Once we integrate the TNC as the last mile solution, how we calculate the best travel time for them. So there is a huge matrix of travel time you can imagine. It's 801 census tracts to 801 census tracts. It's 640,000 data points. And transit travel time is easy, right? the direct transit route, whatever the shortest time for me. But if we have TNC as the last mile connection, then suddenly I open up a lot of more opportunities. I could go this route and take a short TNC trip. I could go that route, take another TNC ride. So we just choose among the three, the shortest travel time. We still assume that travel time is what people value. So the shortest travel time. And we choose this route as the best route to calculate how I get to my jobs. And it's a still similar equation. So we have the jobs, the more jobs surrounding you, the better. And the shorter time through transit TNC integration, the shortest time is still the best. Then we calculate job accessibility based on that. However, how to get to this route? And again, going back, we have the scenario analysis. We have 9 scenarios based on 3 fare threshold. So the lower the fare, the shorter TNC trip you're allowed, right? The larger the fare we give you, we subsidize you, and the longer the TNC trips that you are allowed to. And there is transfer penalties as well. So I have to hold on here, waiting for my rise. Then could be different penalties in terms of time for me. 0 minutes is unrealistic, right? You get off the bus, even you request an Uber. No, you have to wait. And there is still stress. You have to look, where is my car? Where is my car? So 0 minutes is not realistic, but this is the motivation for a transportation person to work on. We want to have a smooth, comfortable transfer. So 5, 0, 5, and 10 minutes transfer panel. Any questions so far? Am I going too fast? Okay, so this is the second part of that analytical framework on the top thing. Well, we have transit, then because of the subsidies for the TNC trips, then we simply reach more opportunities. Now here is how we calculate the accessibility for this TNC transit integration. Okay, then we get both of them together and we deduct the transit from TNC, then we got the improvement. Still continuing the methodology and data. So this is, when I get to the results, it's boom, boom, boom results. But before the results, it's still descriptive, it's still going back to the conceptual framework. These are the distribution of low-income workers based on different race. So all low-income workers, white, Black, Asian. The story is segregation is so severe in Chicago. There is almost no overlap between where white low-income workers live and where Black low-income workers live. And Asians, in terms of number, is small, but they also apparently only cluster in some areas. So segregation is severe in the city of Chicago. And the low-def data does not differentiate race ethnicity as the intersection of that. So we only have non-Hispanic low-income workers and Hispanic low-income workers. And again, segregation, right? Again, they have different patterns. Again, they don't actually overlap in terms of where they live. And this is by gender: male low-income workers, female low-income workers. We think they should be relatively similar, right? But not really. Okay, so that map just shows the distribution. The previous 3 sets of maps just shows the distribution of the population. Then we'll lay over with the accessibility improvement. Then this is calculate weighted average in terms of accessibility improvement. So that's just simple calculation. Okay, I'm getting into the results then. So this is accessibility improvement already. So, sorry, not improvement yet. No, This is the accessibility. This one is without the TNC as the last mile solution. This is pure transit, only rely on the transit system in Chicago. This is the accessibility map. And of course, the center, right? Good concentration of low-income jobs and good transportation services there for sure. The center has highest accessibility. And you go out to different parts of Chicago, accessibility declines. This is a very common story. Then I focus on the 3 scenarios with the same subsidy. So this pretty low subsidy, $5 for the Uber, Lyft travel, and you know $5 that gets you 1 mile, 2 miles, right? This is a very low fare. Just assuming that situation, we subsidize $5 and how far it can help you. Then we have different transfer penalties, unrealistic 0 minutes, 5 minutes, and 10 minutes. So this is the $5 low fare, 0 transfer penalty. Then you can see the higher accessibility places expand a little bit, right? For sure, give me some money, I take Uber, Lyft, then that I improve my access. And 0 minute is not realistic. So the next 2 maps will show 5 and 10 minutes transfer penalty. But because it's penalty, because it increased travel time, that accessibility is gonna be lower than this one. Yeah. So accessibility improvement shrink a little bit, and this one among all the 3 like TNC integration models, then this one has the lowest accessibility because the transfer penalty is the largest. This is the visual presentation, and I'll show you the data, what exactly it shows. So we have 9 scenarios, different fare system. The $5 one was just what we showed, and different penalty system. On the top of the table is like, if no TNC trips as the last mile solution, this is the accessibility, just a number there. And then with the TNC integration, the smallest improvement among all the 9 scenarios, the smallest improvement for sure happened for the scenario with the lowest subsidies in fare, $5, and longest time penalty, right? The biggest transfer penalty. So $5, 10 minutes. That's the worst improvement, the least what we can do. Still, it's some accessibility improvement. It's 1%, 1.3%, still some improvement. And then you can guess the best case scenario for sure is the largest subsidy and the smallest transfer penalty. So that's 12% improvement. So $10 get you far, and if our transfer is smooth, then it will get to more opportunities. Okay, so that's accessibility improvement without looking at population groups. Now we start to look at population groups. So this is weighted average based on the distribution of the workers and accessibility improvement you see. And again, on the top is transit accessibility without TNC plays a role. Asian low-income workers have the highest accessibility. Okay, but this is not surprising. We always know that African American workers have the lowest accessibility. Okay. And the table body showed accessibility improvement based on these different scenarios. All these different scenarios, I highlight which group has the highest accessibility improvement for that scenario, which group. So for almost all scenarios, African Americans experience the largest accessibility improvement, almost all scenarios. So starting situation, very bright, very upsetting. Then with the TNC integration, we make up a little bit of the gaps. We improve African Americans' accessibility a little bit larger than for other groups. Is it okay? Is it equitable? Is it just? We can argue that, right? But it starts to make up some of the initial big gaps. So in that sense, at least the direction where we're going is good, right? Just starting to fill up the holes. Non-Hispanic and Hispanic. Non-Hispanic has higher accessibility initially than Hispanic. And then with the TNC integration, still non-Hispanic experience larger improvement than Hispanic low-income workers. So non-Hispanic start from a good position comparatively, then get further improvement in their accessibility. So enlarge the initial ethnic gap in accessibility. Male, female. Male low-income workers have a higher accessibility. And then female low-income workers receive more benefits than male workers. So again, it's start from relatively inferior position in terms of accessibility, but the transit TNC integration improved their situation slightly better. So reduce that accessibility gap a little bit. So this is our finding, so the conclusion. We figure overall still integrating TNC, well, we put money there. We gave money to low-income workers that do help all low-income workers. So it's still beneficial. The benefits are not distributed evenly. We are pretty relatively encouraged by the situation for African Americans and for Asians. So they receive more accessibility benefits by this integration, reducing their initial gaps in accessibility. So we feel, well, okay, that's good, at least good direction. However, Hispanic workers tend to gain very small or smaller benefits than non-Hispanic workers. So that's basically our finding. This is just a paper, so it's only like some discussion of the findings, and we have some disclaimers. There are so many discussions about the TNC integration, and nowadays you probably noticed that transit ridership has declined. People don't feel comfortable to get on transit for safety reasons, for health reasons, and for some other, all these like security, safety concerns, etc. So it's a huge topic in the transportation field that transit is losing the lure, is losing the attraction to riders. And there is some discussion to cut transit services where we don't have enough riders because it's so costly, and then we're polluting the air and having traffic, etc., etc. So we're saying, well, we are not in that discussion there. But this is my personal interest in terms of the research. So if TNC could be complementing the existing transit services, so probably we should look into, because TNC is relatively flexible, it's small vehicles, right? Rather than running a 40-foot buses, we run small vehicles on demand that could be potentially efficient and affordable and equitable. So that discussion needs to happen. When transit ridership goes down, when some transit services are not as efficient, then using TNC or at least on-demand services can potentially fill up the holes, fill up the gaps relatively efficiently. So this framework can help us to quantify that, to quantify whether we did fill up the hole, whether we did serve the population groups. And we also say that these are hypothetical scenarios. We know like subsidies is a topic, right? It's a topic outside of this theoretical or methodological exploration. We do not advocate at all to subsidize directly the private business, i.e. TNC, Uber, Lyft. We're not advocating for that. We're not saying that we should give money directly to the company to run the services so that low-income people can use them. That's not our purpose. Our purpose is just to demonstrate that there is potential public-private partnership, like discounted fares or using the same fare system, then put some subsidies there. We just want to have relatively flexible and good collaboration so that we can help low-income workers to get where they need to go, where they want to go. And we demonstrate that theoretically or conceptually, that integration will help some of the low-income workers. How it can be worked out institutionally or financially, that's for future research, but we're not advocating for subsidizing private businesses. That's my presentation. Thank you so much. And it's public and it's open source, so that's the link to the paper.
I think it's a really cool, important stuff that you're working on. So I was wondering about, you were saying at the end that potentially this analytic framework could be expanded to other kinds of scenarios. And I'm thinking in a place like Gainesville and other ex-urban or rural kinds of locations where you might have the opposite problem, where maybe you need TNC for the first mile to connect sort of segregated communities, low-income communities to the sort of employment sectors.
Right.
Could the framework could, I would get, oh, sorry.
No, well, I was like, where is it? What is happening? Sorry. Sorry,
You're good.
that's me. Yeah.
No worries. So I guess what I was wondering is, I'm guessing this framework could be used for that kind of analysis as well. It's not so rigid that it can only be used in urban scenarios.
Totally. And we thought about it. For sure, adding first mile will just like totally change everything because it's just like too many possible scenarios we have to tease out. Our argument is that this is accessibility to jobs. So from home to work. When I'm like me, the first mile connection is pretty easy for me. Relatively easier, I shouldn't say pretty easy. It's relatively easier for me to coordinate the first mile connection, get a ride from the neighbors, family members, pick me, drop me off, etc., etc. We understand that argument does not go far. So yes, first mile and last mile connection would be awesome. And when you mention expert, I don't know exactly what direction you're looking. Are you talking about the density, the lack of opportunities, or are you talking about people, the reverse commute? People need to come from, rather than like live in a city going to jobs all over, it's reverse commute.
Yeah, this is where I'm beginning to have my depth. This is not my field, but so I don't know what the proper classification might be. But I mean, I'm thinking of, a lot of communities in Florida, for instance, that look a lot like Gainesville, that are growing very, very fast. But there's a lot of concentration in places downtown or around universities, but still very segregated communities that are on the east side of town that are not connected to bus routes or anything like that. And so that's the kind of there's a lot of communities that look like that increasingly. So I was especially in the state and throughout the South and the Sun Belt. So that's what I was kind of thinking of.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. To be continued, the research.
So when I was looking at your map of Chicago, and I was like, oh yeah, I can sort of tell myself that story because I lived there for a couple of years. Is there sort of an extra layer of real estate value or rental property prices that kind of explains why it is that the lower income workers are coming all the way into sort of the transportation corridor hubs, where maybe it's much more expensive for them to be able to live, and so there's actually sort of there's that sort of added distance of where you can afford to live versus where you can get a job that is that whole city layout.
Do we have urban geographer or economic geographer in this room? Because that's the question to Doctor Who residential location choices. I don't know if you want to chime in.
So, okay, so, I think this refers to the paradox of residential pattern. So usually a general pattern in the US and North America cities is that the poor usually live on relatively extensive land. So close to the city center, like inner city. On the other hand, the wealthier usually live, in a suburban area, relatively cheaper. So that's the residential paradox, and several factors. Basically, is the trade-off between housing costs and transportation costs. And we assume, based on existing, pattern, jobs for low-income workers usually located close to the city center, not, suburban area. And also, if they move to suburban area, cheaper land, larger house, there is no or very limited public transit coverage.
Yeah.
So they cannot easily get to where they want. For example, they work, but the transit coverage is usually better in the city center. So that's those patterns kind of explain why the residential land is paradox. Hopefully it helps.
Yeah.
And so that's still like purely economic explanation and the social explanation. They are both low income. Then white workers can be accepted. African American workers are concentrated, do not have the option when they go into the neighboring area. So that's housing market discrimination playing a role there.
Socially, wouldn't there be like ethnic enclaves that go too that keep people?
Could be, right?
I'm just thinking about New York City, where I'm not from the city, I'm from just outside, and there are ethnic enclaves that people would not move out of, very small area,
Right.
because that's where their entire life is.
Yeah, so like Asian communities might be Hispanic workers. I cannot really speak about the experience there, but could be.
There's other, I think, important economic forces at work that need to be looked at. For example, the gentrification or redevelopment of places, and they would typically happen not necessarily in an enclave which is heavily dense toward one particular ethnic group, racial group, but on the periphery of those, typically
Could be.
right between on the south side of Chicago, but in the middle.
Right.
There's a gentrification occurring, but what happens is that displaces the poor even farther away
Right.
from perhaps jobs, because the land values start going up. We're getting
Right.
back to your argument, so it forces them out. So I think looking at just the transportation problem without looking at the other forces at work is only looking at one side of the coin, so to speak, and these other things need to be looked at as well, like the displacement of low-income people because of gentrification and
Right.
redevelopment. I've seen this in Birmingham, Alabama. I've seen it in Memphis when I've traveled there.
Yeah.
I go there for years and years, and all of a sudden this housing that was relatively inexpensive disappeared. Now there's these huge restaurants and these 3-4 story condos and townhouses and things, and the poor have been driven out. Where are they going? They're going farther into the periphery, farther and farther away from, and they're losing
Opportunities.
accessibility to those
Yeah.
jobs.
Right.
Even further. And that's it. So what I'm getting at, a comprehensive look at the transportation system, the housing market, all these things have to be considered. This as a planner. So
Yeah,
this is one portion. This
it's
is
one snapshot right now.
And there's so many other things that are happening.
Right, it's chicken and egg, right? Gentrification happens because the new generation, I'm looking at the gentrifiers, would like to be able to get away from cars. And so like for strictly transportation perspective, we know bike lanes are one of the indicators of gentrification. And we also know like the real transit, TOD, transit-oriented development, those are kind of the factors the encourager of gentrification. So gentrification is happening around downtown Chicago. So transportation encourage them to gentrify. Then I didn't follow Chicago transportation planning for years. I didn't follow that. But years ago, there was a proposal of Central Line or Circle Line. I really cannot remember this in years. They were proposing a Circle Line to meet the demand of increasing people who gentrify, who want to concentrate there. So transportation is the chicken, then encourage gentrification, then transportation need to meet their growing demands. Yeah, but that's gentrification is more complex than that. I'm only talking about transportation gentrification.
I have a question from online. Very interesting talk. You know, my father actually is a transportation planner. So over the years, I've sort of, you know, at least heard from some of the stuff in the UK, which is probably quite a bit different. But I am curious about sort of the social side, which is, you know, you're modeling what the potential benefits could be to particular communities. But I'm wondering, do you know whether those communities will use those systems? Let's say hypothetically, if they were to suddenly pop into being, you know, what do you have a sense of how people are already using these systems and whether they would, you know, because for example, as a woman, I might be a little bit suspect over using ride share or individual taxi like service, but I'm just curious whether that's been part of the exploration to this point.
It is, and if I can go back to my first slide where I show the FlexRide Milwaukee. But of course, like all the papers, the project is in my core field. So my core field, that everything is kind of different pieces of that. So this is the experiment. FlexRide Milwaukee is the experiment. How to answer the question? We had the project is very successful politically, and I guess institutionally. It hasn't reached to the point for me as a researcher in terms of performance measure, in terms of the actual impacts. So let me explain what I mean. So this is one experiment, right? One experiment having the kind of on-demand services at the end of your transit trip and help you to get to your jobs. And because we are funded by NSF, so it's very heavy subsidized, and it's an experiment. Then mayors of Milwaukee, county executives of Milwaukee and Waukesha, so different, like the central county and the suburban county. Employment, workforce development board, business association, employers, so different businesses like in different parts of the Milwaukee County, all participated, all help us to spread the word, help us to recruit riders and drivers, help us to have those word of mouth communication, because low-income workers really want to, oh, my friend used this, right? Yeah. So they all helped. And it was, the project started April last year during the severe labor shortage. Employers are always like, I need workers, I need to think about these transportation services so that my workers can come to my businesses. So everybody was so motivated. And that's the reason I'm saying like it's institutional success, it's a political success. And after our project, then our community partner got $4.2 million from the state to sustain it. Our project was $1 million just launching. Then they got 4.2 million to sustain it. So it's a success. People are looking forward to this kind of services. People are willing to put time, to put efforts and some resources to support this kind of service. We need it. Not a step back in terms of performance. What we found puzzling, and we started to find explanation for that. We didn't get as great ridership as we expected. Initially, because our project needs to serve people who are employed or looking for jobs, i.e. labor force participants. Then we figure, okay, if you're employed already, although you say, well, I want to have transit services, blah, blah, blah. That worker has already figured out the transportation solution before this. They have already, right? They have already figured out that if people are looking for jobs, then it's not necessarily in the places that we gave the service. So at the end of the day, by the end of our research pilot, we say it's a huge subsidies and our cost per ride is still very high. It's still very high. So in performance wise, it doesn't reach to the point, and we're still pondering what is the reason. For sure, research limitation is one, because we have to screen participants for our research project. So right now we open up, so it's the continued service. We opened up to the not research participants, then rather started to increase.
Okay, great, thank you.
All right, I have one question. I see that from your accessibility model, there are two components, number of job opportunities and the travel time. Have you looked into the temporal patterns of job opportunities and travel time? For example, low-income workers, they might have multiple jobs, and their jobs are not, I would not say like 9 to 5 for everyone. They might, do jobs like in the evening or midnight. So how would you do that, like travel time and count for that in model?
I did look at peak hour versus non-peak hours, and I don't remember the results exactly because this is the main finding. There were some nuanced differences. I think please refer to the paper for the accurate answer. But what I remember is during off-peak hours, this is actual peak hours here. During off-peak hours, the improvement for African Americans are not as great as we show here for peak hours. And one limitation is that because I need to use data from all these different sources, right? We understand a lot of second shift and third shift jobs happen during the time, no transit, and happen during the time. Actually, CMAP, so the Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, they collect travel time during daytime, right? Peak hours, 5 to 9 in the morning, 4 to 7 in the night, then non-peak hour during the middle of the day. No data for the night. So like even initially, I cannot really do the analysis for the nighttime, and we don't have weekend time either. Yeah, but it's a huge part of the commutes. I know that. Yeah.
How long did the project in Milwaukee go for?
That $1 million only support us for roughly 8 months in the research planning. Transportation is expensive. Yeah, it's expensive.
Yeah, that's. I mean, but just hearing a 1 hour presentation on it, like it's hard for you not to react by thinking like, of course it's politically popular when NSF is paying for it.
Then the thing, right?
And ridership is low because 8 months is not very long. So
Right.
I see those two
Yeah, then they started to put money.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then of course, like everybody's. I think I can talk it on YouTube. I think I can talk. Everybody jumps in immediately, for sure. Yes, it's money from NSF, but everybody jumps in because everybody thinks we need it. So there is a longer story. There was like years, 20 years history. There is a attempt there to extend the transit network to the suburban area. There is a attempt there, even with lawsuits, to have different transportation services for low-income people. There are NGO, there are community organization try to get it. So it was 20 years in working, thinking we need this, but the fragmentation of transportation service delivery, and of course, some different interests between the urban county, city of Milwaukee, and suburban county, which look at city of Milwaukee in a very different ways. There is some like different expectation or motivation that made the service not existing before our project. But once we started to have an idea, and the reason we won the award is because everybody jumps in, say, we need this, please pilot it. We see the results, then we'll put in the resources. If no pilot, then nobody knows what we are talking about when we say a micro transit. What does that mean? How long does it that? So the 4.2 million from the state is a commitment. Then we can roll it further.
Okay, if there's no further question. Thank you so much again.